afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our webinar. We've chosen, as I just heard there, a very punchy title, which is DEI Dead? And I deliberately chose that topic because of what's going on at the moment across the world, but particularly in the US. And there's been significant shifts influenced by sort of political and legal developments recently. And in January 2025, President Donald Trump issued an executive order, 14151, titled Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing. And that was to direct federal agencies to terminate their DEI-related mandates, policies and programs. And really and then there's been ripple effects in workplaces since. Companies like McDonald's, Meta and Amazon have kind of scaled back their DEI efforts. Other companies like Apple and Costco have said in states that they're going to maintain their DEI commitments and are sort of doubling down on it. And there's been all sorts of changes in educational institutions and so on. So I guess, Europe is very different than the US in terms of, our legislation in the workplace and so on and so on. But I thought it'd be fantastic just to hear and have a bit of a discussion and a debate around that. And I'm joined today, so my name is Loretta Dignam. I'm the founder and CEO of the Menopause Hub Academy and Menopause Hub. I started working in menopause about 6 years ago. Before that, I had a life before menopause, and it was primarily working in the corporate sector in marketing, communications and branding with big multinationals. But anyway, less about me and more importantly, the guests. So we've Lorna Conn, who's the CEO of CPL, huge organization. Many of you will know of her or know her. Huge organization, employs, I don't know, over 15,000 people in all sorts of companies, large, small, American, local, domestic, international, etc. So we're delighted, Lorna, to have you here today.
Thanks, Loretta.
Brilliant. And then we have Cathal Divilly, who's from Great Place to Work. And Cathal is the CEO of Great Place to Work, and they do a lot of fantastic work in organizations, understanding what's required to make a great place to work, but also how to help organizations implement policies and change and culture around becoming a great place to work. So thanks, Cathal, for joining us.
Thanks, Loretta, for having me. Hello to everyone.
And they recently, Great Place to Work held their awards there. So lots of amazing companies being awarded recently. And then finally, last but not least, we have Laura Donovan Calver, who is the Business Development Director at the Irish Centre for Diversity. You've also had your awards in February, I think. So it's been a busy season for awards.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us.
Lovely to be here, Loretta.
Brilliant. So listen, I think we'll kick off, and we're going to have a casual conversation amongst ourselves, and we have some questions. So I guess I'd like to start with you, Laura, really, to give us the kind of a definition of what DEI is and what about where women fit in this definition, so that everybody starts kind of on the same page.
Yeah, so I suppose when you look at DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, there's lots of definitions out there. So, but what we tend to look at within the Irish Centre for Diversity is under the legal framework that Ireland is, works by. And we look at the 9 grounds of discrimination, so that we really have a framework to go through what people are protected under when it comes to the law in employment, but also if they are going out and about in, everyday situations, services, that kind of thing. Where women fall into this definition is really that gender is specifically named within the 9 grounds of discrimination. It falls as one of the 9 grounds of discrimination. So if people feel, whether it's in employment or out and about, that they have been discriminated because of their gender, they can go forward with a case. So it's really important that we, take our responsibility seriously as employers when it comes to the 9 grounds of discrimination. We also talk about diversity when it comes to diversity of thought. So we like to look at things like neurodiversity and differences in the way people think or behave, and recognizing that, because that can really help us within organizations and business. When it comes to E, as in equity, we refer to equity. A lot of organizations will refer to equality. The reason that we use the term equity is because when you're looking at equality, a lot of the time you're talking about giving equal pay for equal work, or giving everyone the same chance. But when it comes to equity, what we're looking at is giving people the tools they need to do the job to the best of their ability. Now, we can't talk about outside of work, but really that's what we're referring to when it comes to equity. And when it comes to inclusion, again, lots of definitions out there, but what we would see it as is all of the actions an organization can take to make people feel included in the workplace. So really, we look at inclusion as activities, strategy, programs. What are you putting in place so that people are made to feel included within the organization, and all the good things that go with that? So I hope that covers it, but there's lots and lots of definitions out there.
Yeah, brilliant. No, it's great to get that definition, and it's also great to hear about the sort of the legal framework and sort of where women fit in. So now we get into some questions. So I've already set the scene by saying that diversity and DEI has been a major focus for businesses worldwide for the last maybe decade or so, and obviously it's facing challenges, especially in the US, with companies rolling back, but also with legal challenges that are reshaping policy. So, I guess, what's your take on all of that? And so, Lorna, what do you think about what's happening? I'd love to hear your views, and then we go on to Cathal. And just before we answer, I just wanted to say to anybody, if you want to put a question into the chat or into the Q&A or whatever, please feel free to do that. And we've allocated some time at the end where we can have a Q&A where you can ask whatever is on your mind. But in the meantime, just type them into the chat. So sorry, Lorna, that question is, what do you think of it all?
I mean, I think it's really disappointing, I have to say, particularly large organizations with big logos that people aspire to work in are coming out publicly now and walking back from their commitments to DE&I. And, it begs the question, how authentic were they in terms of their commitment to begin with? I mean, for us, certainly in CPL, and as you mentioned, Loretta, we're a large employer. We employ over 14,500 people. Actually, when DEI is deployed properly, it's deployed in a very practical and pragmatic way, and it becomes part of the very essence of your organization. It's part of your DNA. It's a way of living. It's a way of working. So companies coming out and making big statements that they're rowing back on commitments to DE&I creates kind of a falsehood about their commitment to begin with. If it is, if it's such a simple thing to do, to go out and make a statement like that. To us as a large employer, albeit in a small geography in Ireland, to go out and make that type of a statement, we'd be turning our back on who we are as people, who we are as an organization. So I'm finding it really difficult to reconcile in my mind how a company can be such a large advocate and vocal advocate for DE&I, and then suddenly, almost like a flick of a switch, they're changing their outlook and their commitments, and that lands very poorly with me, I have to say. And I think certainly for prospective candidates and people who are looking to join those organizations, it's a bit of a red flag, Loretta, to be honest. And I think organizations need to be very mindful right now, because the world and their employees are watching. They need to be very mindful around their messaging with respect to DE&I and what the future holds for those types of commitments.
I know I have a daughter who's 23, and when I was looking for my job way back in the day, all we were told to get was get a job that's permanent and pensionable, and that's all we sort of cared about. But anyway, when I look and we're in full employment and so on, and attracting talent is really important. I listen to the things that their age group and are looking for. And it is things around diversity, equity and inclusion, and it is other things about work-life balance and so on. And therefore, you know, this whole thing of attracting talent, you're absolutely right. You know, is it part of your DNA and is it authentic, or was it just a tick box exercise? So brilliantly put, and someone's just actually commented there and said very, very brilliantly put. Cathal, just to you, what's your sense of it all?
I think there's no doubt we're at a serious moment, and the clawback from American companies, right, is largely based around the teeth that this came with from, you know, the president. You can't have a US federal government contract if you have D&I targets, right? So it's come with teeth, and it's not just words. It's sort of there's millions and millions and dollars and wrapped up in all of this, right? So it's quite a serious moment. But I also feel we have to see it as an opportunity, right? So it's a serious moment. And what's the opportunity? I completely agree with what Lorna said there around, you know, the authenticity of it. Is D&I almost like a siloed approach we have in our organization, or an extra thing we do within our organization? Because if it is, then I think the reality is it's going to come under a lot of pressure when it comes to budgets, right? Or is it just how we do things? Like, do we build a great place to work for all our people? And it just flows through everything we do, like how it does in CPL as a workplace, right? It flows through everything they do. It wasn't just an extra added on piece, you know. So we're at a critical time in terms of, from an Irish organizational point of view, what do? Do we follow the US companies? Do we take a leadership role here? And stay the course, I would say. But look, I think we can get into the conversation around, you know, the messaging and the updates and the storytelling and all of that that's needed. But it's definitely a critical time. And it's come with teeth because it's wrapped up in millions of dollars. Hence why many of the big announcements are being made, right?
Yeah, no, I think brilliantly put there as well, Cathal, because I've spoken to companies in the US and they said, well, look, you know, we have to get rid of this because we have, you know, 30% of our revenue is in in federal contracts. I've also heard companies being told, you know, overnight, get rid of all, you know, references in your SEO, your search engine optimization, et cetera, to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So absolutely, and I guess one of the questions is, and what I've heard from some of these players in the US is that, you know, they're saying, well, you know, well, it could fit better under. So we're thinking menopause, for example, and menopause workplace education and training. You know, it could fit better under workplace well-being, or under some of those other kind of titles, or belonging, or whatever. So that as long as you're not using those words, DEI, you know, you can reframe it. But we'll come on and talk about that. Laura, what's your take on it? Because, you know, this is to the heart.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with wholeheartedly with Lorna and with Cathal as well, in that it is, we are in a critical time. There's no doubt about it. And I would say, you know, there's no point in burying your head in the sand and, you know, wishing that it'll just go away, that these changes in lots of different levels are going to affect us. They will, of course. What I would say is, backing exactly what Lorna said, if large companies within Ireland decide to, you know, come out with statements or even internally roll back on their initiatives. People are very clever, and especially younger graduates coming into the workplace, they see it very clearly and very quickly if these initiatives suddenly start to go away. So I don't think that is going to be an option. What I would say, though, is that I think, to Cahill's point and what you just said, there won't necessarily, D&I initiatives won't go away, even in the companies that have come out to say that they're rolling back on DEI initiatives. I think what's going to happen is they are going to put those initiatives into other parts of their business. We may see a move towards things like the language being used as culture or belonging, or so these initiatives aren't going to go away. That's just not going to happen because, for instance, things like the legal system, the legal frameworks that people have specifically here in Ireland and within Europe, that's not going to go anywhere, but they may reframe where they're putting it, and they may stop using certain terms, especially when it comes into form in the States because of the federal agreements and all of that kind of thing. So what I would say is we're going to see changes, but our D&I initiatives aren't going anywhere. Apart from anything else, we are now in a time where we're getting into CSRD reporting. So we are about to go into ESG reporting, where we have to meet specific requirements when it comes to disability, when it comes to gender, when it comes to a whole host of things under sustainability within ESG that goes to Europe. And we just can't get away from that. So I don't think it's going anywhere, but I do think there will be reframing with some of the larger organizations. What I would say is they will see some exodus from their companies because of that, for sure.
Yeah, interesting. And I do think, I suppose, the difference, as I said at the outset, from Ireland to Europe, or sorry, Europe to the US, is that those legislative and legal frameworks are kind of quite protective in their way. And so, Cathal, what do you think in terms of Irish and European companies? I mean, maybe your what Laura's just said is captured it all, but you know, what do you imagine they might do in relation to DE&I?
I think there's to what Laura said there. Like I think there's going to be, an element of still doing the work that's needed, but positioning it differently, different language that's been used. You can already see, let's say, within US conferences that diversity is not being used as much, right? But it's the same point that's being made. It's the same storytelling. It's just the language is changing. So I think we'll see a lot of that. I mean, the reality is, for some of these organizations, even though they've made some big announcements, the reality for some of them is they're actually doing great work, right? So if you think of the announcement that Accenture made, right? I'm not saying they're perfect, but Accenture are doing incredible things in terms of, numbers of females in leadership positions and things like that. So the reality of what they're doing is quite strong. It is disappointing, however, of course, in terms of the statement that was made. So I think expect a reframing, new language, new messaging, and I'd be really excited about Irish organizations focusing in around personalization of the employee experience. And we already see it with some organizations. They're very good at personalizing the employee experience. So going far above practices and policies, but really understanding the pain points that people are experiencing within their teams, all right? And then showing up for them at those critical moments. Because, we're very good at showing up for people maybe at the good moments and the happy moments and the celebratory moments, and we've got to do that. But the question or the challenge is, how do we show up for people in terms of those challenging moments? How well do we truly know our people and the pain points that they receive? So I think expect to see a lot more in terms of personalization of the employee experience, all right? Which goes to the heart from a strategy point of view in terms of we build a great culture for all our people, all right? So I'm excited, Loretta, to see more focused work around, for example, the work you've been doing in terms of the menopause, right? And the organizations really showing up for people that are perimenopause, menopause, going through that, the training that you're doing, Loretta, in terms of not just female leaders but male leaders, all right, becoming experts in terms of that area. What are we doing around fertility supports? What can we do around that in terms of personalizing the experience? What are we like in terms of supporting people that are going through cancer? How do we personalize that experience? How do we be supportive in those moments? So I expect the work that organizations have already started around that personalizing of experience, showing up for people in those critical moments, I expect those things to accelerate. We may be using different language than we've used before, but I'm excited to see that work continue. And when we're doing that, when we're personalizing the employee experience, well, then we're unleashing performance.
Yeah.
All right, then we're really unleashing people's performance. We're meeting people where they're at. And we'll absolutely be in a better position to attract talent if that's the type of organization we create.
Yeah, I love that actually, the personalizing the employee experience. I think that's yeah, brings it into another realm altogether nearly, doesn't it? As opposed to you know, maybe a tick box exercise, because you genuinely are supporting that individual. If I turn to you, Lorna, in the US, the administration, their stance was that some of these initiatives, although they're designed to be equitable and everything, have actually been discriminatory and deviate from merit-based practices. And so that was the kind of the coming in, is that surely everyone deserves a chance based on merit and not these other kind of inbuilt things. So I guess, you know, could we ever see a time in Ireland where we face a similar sort of backlash around what we have in place currently around DE&I?
I mean, I think certainly it's a moment of pause, probably for everybody across the world, Ireland included, in terms of how they frame their DEI commitments. And actually, there might be an opportunity here, because the more sustainable organizations that have diversity, equity, and inclusion buried within their DNA and buried within their processes as part of their normal day-to-day working environment, actually, that's probably a more sustainable path, as opposed to perhaps huge kind of divisions of functions being added on to tick this big DE&I box. And I probably sound a little bit cynical, because honestly, that's how I feel when I hear some of the big announcements that are coming from the US. The reason why we feel so comfortable as an organization in terms of CPL is, you know, even if I went out as CEO and said, we're going to roll back what? Not a single individual in an organization has in their title DE&I. You know, it is part of the fabric of the organization right throughout the organization. And I think perhaps there might be a move towards more sustainable DE&I practices, if that makes sense, that are longer living, if that makes sense, and survive big political moments like this, that actually can continue to thrive. I think there's probably going to be a bigger focus on inclusivity as part of that reframing. There's just naturally going to be a move away, I think, from using the word diversity into more kind of a focus on inclusivity. And I think probably, given the volatility now around DE&I practices, it's probably a sensible move, so we don't lose all of the great work that has been done in the past. So certainly Ireland is not immune to this kind of inflection point that we're all experiencing around DE&I. And I agree with Cathal, you know, this has come with teeth. It's very, very difficult for some organisations to stand out from the pack and put significant amounts of revenue at risk, because at the you have another, I suppose, responsibility, and that's to your employees, to make sure that you keep them in gainful employment. So it's a really big decision to leave the pack, if that makes sense, and make those brave statements, like some organizations. So we have to give great credit to those who have stood right behind their DE&I commitments and don't intend to do anything. But just a final note, I'm a real believer in meritocracy. No woman will ever want to be the token female in a leadership role. So I think DEI is less about tokenism, less about compromising meritocracy, and more about equalizing the playing field and creating environments where more women are included and are motivated and incentivized to reach their very fullest potential in terms of their career aspirations. So I think that's the important lens we look through in terms of promoting diversity.
Brilliant. Yeah, well said. Very well said. Laura, if I go to you, you know, is there a risk then that DEI, or whatever it's going to be called, belonging or whatever, is that it actually becomes then just a tick box exercise? Because look, we're in danger that this could, you know, it could shift again and whatever. And how do you make sure that it is impactful and as part of a DNA, the DNA of the culture of the organization, and not just a kind of a buzzword and a bit of an add-on, as Cathal has said?
Yeah, I think that the big thing at the moment, I feel, for people to ensure that it's not a tick box is to assure people, is to give reassurance to your teams and let them know that nothing is going to change within what they do, and that just because these statements are coming out and that language may change slightly, that there is an assurance that they are committed, or that the senior leadership team and board members are committed to the well-being and inclusion of all of their employees. I think there is nothing worse for psychological safety, or the, you know, how you feel about entering the workplace on a day-to-day basis, than someone coming out with a broad statement that they're rowing back on something. There has to be assurances given at the moment to people so that they feel secure and safe in their employment. You mentioned there about, you know, merit-based, Loretta, and I wanted to just make a point on it because I think it's really important. Diversity and inclusion has never been about giving people jobs that didn't have the merit to be there in the first place. That's not what it's about. Essentially, what we're trying to do is ensure the people, those talented people that are out there, have access to get into the workplace, and that once they're there, they are happy to stay in that workplace. We're not looking at, and we never have been when it comes to diversity and inclusion, looking at getting less talented people into roles for the sake of giving people jobs. At the end of the day, when we look at these businesses, they're business people. And when we look around Ireland, the good thing I would say about us is people that are in entrepreneurial roles and run businesses have a lot of business savvy. They are not going to change things if they think that they're going to lose talent. So I think it's very important that we emphasize the fact that this has never been about giving people jobs that don't have the merit to be there. What we're trying to do is keep the talent we have and attract an abundance of other talent, so that we can, even if you think about where we're going with AI and all that kind of thing, we need to see broader talent. And also, it's so important that, especially here in Ireland, we are reflecting the people we serve. At the end of the day, we are a diverse community, whether we like it or not. That's what we are now. And if you are not reflecting internally in your employee base the people that are coming and buying from you, then people see that. They no longer want to buy from those people. They want to see themselves reflected in the businesses they do business with. And I think it's just really important to note all of that.
Just
Yeah,
on that,
I mean,
can I jump in?
work right.
Just on that point there that Laura made, right? So, you know, setting up your culture to reflect your customer, right, is a really good way to position your strategy. Like, Woodies are an incredible organization, right? And all the work they do around their culture is based around ensuring their culture reflects the people that come through the stores every day. And of course, the people that come through the stores are every type of person. And they build their culture that way, and they work on their practices to, you know, to celebrate that. Well, I love that point that Laura made. Like, I mean, we've got to build cultures that reflect our consumers. All right, and our consumers, all right, are diverse.
Yeah, no, great point. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit more is that, you know, you talked, sorry if I cut across you, Cathal. No, is that let's get into sort of, you know, the so what of it. So what is the value of DE&I, or call it whatever you want to call it, when it comes to talent attraction and retention? What do you think, Cathal? You see it this day in, day out, I'd say.
Yeah. So like, what's the value of building an inclusive culture, right? What's the value of building a great place to work for all your people, not just some of your people, right? Well, like, there's a critical value around performance, right? Because we have to keep performance in this conversation and bring it with us all the way, right? So you know, if you're building a culture for all your people, right? Well, then you're unleashing everyone's performance, right? And that's a critical value in terms of how we think about the strategy of the business, and how we think about the culture of the business, right? It's performance. When we're building a culture that's focused on, you know, unleashing the best out of people, well, then we're focused on leadership. I think leadership is an important aspect of this, right? So, people's experience within their culture is largely based off their experience with their leaders, right? And building a great culture inevitably means you have leaders that celebrate difference, that are trained and developed around celebrating difference, that really understand their people, the makeup of their teams, and can show up for them when needed. Right. So I think performance is at the heart of it, all right? Performance is at the heart of it. There was a point made as well around people are watching. The talent is watching, right? The talent is watching our cultures, right? And no longer really does the talent want to hear from companies or a boring CEO like me. They actually want to hear from people who are doing the job. When somebody in the talent market is deciding, well, should I work there or should I go for interview or whatever, they're interested in, well, who's already doing that job, who's already working there, and what's their experience working there. So when you commit to building, a great culture for all your people, you're unleashing really good advocacy, I would say, Loretta, where people who are already doing the job are advocating for this workplace. Right. And that's going to have a big impact in terms of attracting talent. And then just the final point I'll make on it is, an inclusive culture is focused on building high trust leadership. All right. There's a lot of really good research out there to say that when somebody is having is in a high trust relationship with their leader, that person will promote their company as a place to work. When somebody is having a low trust connection with their leader, it's quite simple. That person will not promote, unless they're being very sinister, that person will not promote their company as a place to work. So if we want to attract more talent and more diverse talent, right, and widen the talent pool, then we've got to focus on building that inclusive culture.
Yes, I've worked in all of those environments that you mentioned. And I know where I'd recommend people work or not work based on that. So it's absolutely spot on. Lorna, you're at the coalface, you're interviewing or recruiting. Maybe you may not be interviewing personally, obviously yourself, but your team, and you're recruiting and across all age groups in all industries and so on. So, tell us about, the Gen Zs and the millennials. They sound like they're a species from another planet, and I sound like I'm about 100 years of age, which I'm not. But tell us about what they're prioritizing, and is there, as Cathal said, would you see that risk at the coalface, really?
Yeah, I would, because let's assume all the hygiene factors are being met in terms of salary, etc., etc. According to Forbes, for instance, 80% of Gen Zers would say that DE&I matter to them in terms of brands they either consume or in terms of companies that they want to work for. So that's a pretty high percentage. I think over the past kind of generation or two, there's just been this widespread move towards a more societally conscious population, if that makes sense. People, employees who want to work in organizations that are conscious of their sustainability credentials, and obviously that extends right out to DE&I. They want to have purpose in what they do. They want to do meaningful work, and they want to have make a valuable contribution to the organizations that they work for, and they want to have pride in the organizations that they work for. So when companies come out and roll back on what one might think is a pretty reasonable commitment to be a diverse and equitable and inclusive organization, it's a red flag, and it does add as a red flag to talent. And I think it's so tough out there trying to get and attract and retain the right talent that your messaging around your commitments to DE&I does form part of your employer value proposition. And if a candidate has a number of options on the table and the hygiene factors are ticked, then they're going to start looking behind the substance of the organization. What's the corporate values? What are their practices around sustainability, DE&I, etc.? And you will be at a competitive disadvantage. So I think there is certainly a lot of credibility in the statement that the message you put out publicly around your DE&I commitments do actually matter in the world of talent attraction.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura, if we look at sort of the role of AI, because no conversation nowadays that doesn't include the word AI in it is worth its salt. So, you know, often as those tools become more common, and maybe you have a view on this, obviously, Lorna, as well, because you're in the recruitment area. Is that they're, you know, biased. So it's a bit like, you know, the echo chamber. So if you're on X, you know, you get fed back to you what you're interested in and how you comment. Is AI meaning that we will that DEI can be kind of factored out or factored in, depending. So what's your view or sense or of that?
Yeah, I think that what I think is really important, because I mean, we're in the business of, we deal with a lot of HR professionals. So, you know, HR directors, or even when it's smaller businesses, maybe CEOs and that kind of thing. And what's really important is that we try and get ahead of the different tools that are coming into the workplace, and really try and manage them as best we can. What I would say is, actually, if we use it properly, AI will actually help us when it comes to this, as opposed to have an inbuilt bias. At the end of the day, we build the AI, people build it, and what we get from it is what we put into it. So it is really important that when we are using the tools, that we are using them really well, that we get to know them really well, and that we train people on how to use them. Like, when we look at recruitment, back in the day, it's not that long ago, what we would have had to do was take our job advertisements and put them through a gender decoder, so that we, you know, didn't have, you know, first of all, terminology in there that was putting certain people off, or different races, nationalities, ethnicities, and so on. So I think AI has actually always, as it has moved on, or any tools we have, has helped us when it comes to the recruitment process. Of course, that is down to who is using it. Yeah. So if AI, I suppose, in all its essence, if you feed it enough of a bias, it's going to develop that bias. So I think it's just important that we try and stay ahead of the game, specifically in Ireland, because obviously we have been a hub for technology here, especially in Dublin, when it comes to Europe, but also globally. So I think we have a massive opportunity when it comes to AI. We have really talented people here in Ireland, that I think if we use it properly, and if we get ahead of the game, we can be seen as another hub for AI. I think there's an opportunity as opposed to a worry there. Of course, if it's used wrongly, it will have bad outcomes, but that would be my sense of it.
Yeah. And Lorna, what are you seeing? Because you're AI and recruitment and HR functions and so on. That's a big part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's just to Laura's point, it's about deploying the power of AI in a really responsible and pragmatic way. We have a huge database here with lots of personal subjects, etc., etc. So we will be considered a higher risk company, I suppose, in terms of data security, etc. So we have to be extra careful in terms of how we deploy AI. But I think particularly for large organizations, it's important to understand and develop the use case, and then deploy it out in a really well managed way with proper training, etc., so people can get the best benefits of the AI tools that they are using. But I mean, I agree with Laura. I think we have a huge opportunity in Ireland, just given the demographic, given the capability, and given the power of the technology that sits within AI and Gen AI, and what it can actually do. Now, I'm a people first person, so I don't ever believe that AI is going to replace the need for that human interface, and that that very curated kind of specialized capability of pulling nuances and making judgments on people and astuteness and all that type of stuff. That's very very special, I suppose, to the human race as opposed to technology. But for sure it can be used to make us better and more efficient at our jobs, for sure.
Yeah, brilliant. And then if I just did a couple of other quick questions before we kind of go to the closing takeaways, and I can see there's questions popping in here, which we'll get to, so we've some time for those. So get your questions in, if you have something pressing or burning that you'd like to have answered. So I guess it's kind of looking to the future, and it's saying, you know, Cathal in particular, I was interested in when you said, you know, this whole personalized experience, is that, you know, how do you go beyond traditional DEI efforts to create truly inclusive cultures where all, you know, give us some examples where employees can feel valued and heard.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you didn't ask me the AI question. I'm only getting used to the soda stream. So I'm delighted you didn't ask me about AI, Loretta. Thank you for that. I
I
think
hope you didn't feel left out, Cathal. I
no,
got a message from AI here, and it said, "Don't ask Cathal anything about AI." He's never used it.
Oh, I'm so happy to be left out on this one. So I think I think there's a few thoughts I would give right on it. I think and we absolutely have to turn this moment into an opportunity, right? And there's an opportunity around language and messaging, right? And nothing is perfect, right? But we've all found ourselves at certain moments, unfortunately, speaking to the choir, right? So we're speaking about a particular topic, and who's in the room? Well, everyone that's in the room is already a believer.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get all religious on it, right? Right? But everyone is a believer, right? So what that's telling us is, right, what can we do around the language and the messaging that we're using, right? So we've so much work ahead of us. We've a lot of work to do around, you know, career development in terms of across all gender and all of that. But we've got to pay attention to the language we use, right? Because for me, it's about how do we build a high performing team? How do we build a high performing organization? Well, you want to know? Well, come and hear this talk, right? But if we get the language wrong around that, we'll end up doing a talk where people that are there are already converted. It's like, I don't. There's a mental health talk in room 3. See you there at 2:00. Well, who's going to go there? Well, like I can guarantee the men won't go there. That's for sure, right? You know, but if it's language around your teammate needs you or how to be a better teammate, well, maybe that will encourage more people to go. So I think this is a great opportunity to work on our language and our messaging to make sure that we get further than just the choir, right? And we're continuing to bring people, everyone along with us. All right. And I think that's an important takeaway that we have here. The strategy is so important. You know, Lorna made the point at the start around, you know, D&I and the disappointment around it. I completely agree. All right. But actually, like, is it an extra thing, like a siloed thing that we were working on, or does it just flow through everything that we do, right? It's a critical moment for Irish organizations. Amazon made that big announcement around, was it bringing everyone back to the office? And the panic was unbelievable. It was like, oh my God, if Amazon are doing it, we all have to do it. Well, no. You build the culture the way you want to build the culture. You build the culture to ensure people are looked after and you take care of their well-being, but you also build and sustain performance. So what's going to help you get there? We do not have to react based on big announcements from American organizations. We have the opportunity here to take a leadership role in terms of this space, because remember, the talent is watching us. Right, so we have a big opportunity to take a leadership role in this. It's actually a commercial opportunity. If your competitor is going one way, that may not be the right way. Well, you have a commercial opportunity to actually position yourself in a different way. So I think it's an exciting time. We definitely need to think about language. We definitely need to think about storytelling, messaging, how we bring the right people into the space. We have to go above and beyond, you know, just speaking to the choir. And we have a lot of work. We have a lot of work ahead of us. But I would really encourage organizations to think about the idea of, if we were to build a personalized employee experience, how would that look and what benefits would that give us? And you can look to organizations like CPL, you can look to organizations like CORE, other organizations like that, who are building a work culture that meets people in the good moments and the difficult moments of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Laura, just to you, so if I was to say, you know, with your crystal ball, which I know you have on your desk there, 25 and beyond, how do you see it panning out for DEI?
Yeah, I mean, I think even in general, look, it's a difficult time for people at the moment, not just in DEI, just even economically when people are looking at what's happening with the states and even some of the announcements yesterday over tariffs and things like that. It's a difficult time. What I would say is we will see some changes. I do really believe, and this is not just because I'm in D&I, I have had a long career in hotels and things like that. I do believe the people that stay consistent with their, even calling it diversity, equity, and inclusion programs will definitely benefit from that. They'll benefit through retention, they'll benefit through on their bottom line. They will benefit more than those that come out with statements that they're rolling back. And I think that's why we see things like Cathal mentioned earlier about Accenture. You'll see very clearly that there was a global statement and then there was an Irish statement. Do you know, and the reason for those statements is because they're really, and I can understand why I really feel for them actually, when they want to assure their colleagues and their employees that nothing is changing. And I think we'll see more of that. But if you are in a place where you're deciding whether to hold back on some of the budget that you were going with when it comes to D&I, now is the time not to do that. All you're doing, like Lorna said, is sending a red flag to the employees that were thinking and coming to you, or those that are already there. You're just saying, we pretended we cared about it, now we don't. So I think we're in a critical time, but it's now is the time to kind of, you know, really set in what you've done all that work for and really set those goals in place and stick with the initiatives that you were doing. We'll see some changes, but I think we're only at the starting point of seeing global statements and then Irish statements. Obviously, with the visit to the White House next week, I feel for Micheál Martin. I have to say he's in a very difficult position going over there, but we have to keep the relationship open between the United States. Whether we do not like everything they're doing, we have to keep those ties open, because it's only in keeping the relationships open that we stop major ramifications when it comes to business overall. So I think that's really, really important that we keep the relationship open. Keep an eye on what's happening globally, but don't lose sight of your business, what you're doing, how much has improved since you've put those initiatives. How happy are people? How, has your absences gone down? All of those good things, you don't want to lose them. So don't, like Cathal said, don't make any massive decisions right now. Hold back, wait on, and give assurance to your employees. I think that's really, really important.
Brilliant. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just take a few questions here. So Lorna, when you were speaking at the beginning, it was about the authenticity piece, and somebody said, you put it so well. The one is, a question here is, I wonder if the flick of a switch regarding DEI that Laura speaks about related to concerns within those non-federal companies, that they would be penalised in terms of funding and reputation within the US if they don't flick the switch. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, well, I think it was probably to Cathal's point that there was a really big concern in corporate America that they would be losing business if they didn't kind of follow suit in terms of the executive orders that were laid down by President Trump. So I'd say there was a certain amount of pressure that made companies feel they had to go and put a statement out. And it's that old kind of cherub, is it, behaviors of profitability, have they sacrificed one for the other? I think what will be very revealing is what actually is going to happen on the ground inside the walls of these organizations. And I suspect that a lot of what they're doing will continue to occur in some shape or form. Maybe it's just more of the public targets and stuff like that, the harder outcomes of the DE&I programs may be rolled back, but I would hope and expect that a lot of the positivity that the DEI programs brought throughout the organization will be maintained, particularly for staff. And I think it's such a critical point that all of this ultimately manifests itself into the bottom line. And I think we need to double down on that message, that diversity not only helps productivity, but it helps profitability. I mean, if Lorna Conn was in a room with a load of white, middle-aged mothers, you know, would we honestly have unbiased conversations? It's the natural instinct is to be biased toward a certain way of thinking. The best conversations I have had is when people that come from a totally different background to me and a different demographic, etc., challenge my thinking. And honestly, it's that diversity of thought makes for better decision making, which ultimately makes for better business. Let's not lose track of that really fundamental commercial objective, I suppose, in terms of DEI. It makes business sense.
Yeah, and then somebody said here, Ireland's come so far on DEI, but there's so much more to do. So backing away would be enormously disappointing and damaging. Interesting to see that Apple hasn't backed away from DEI, even with the threat of losing federal contract. Then there's a question here, which is, what's the role of government within employers' DEI programs? Ireland has the lowest employment of people with disabilities, yet we hear that Ireland is at full employment. Would anyone like to take that?
I can give a couple of quick thoughts, Loretta, if you want. So I think so the reality is the government can do more, right? That's the reality. The government can do more, and there's also a reality which is, let's not wait for the government and the government legislation, the government supports, right? Because we may be waiting for a while. If we were to wait on government legislation for lots of things that we've achieved in this country when it comes to workplace, well, we wouldn't have achieved half of those things. So let's use your example, Loretta. Loretta, if you waited on government legislation and the deficit that's there, right? And because of your advocacy, it's improved. But if you waited for it,
We're still waiting.
You're still waiting, right? But you didn't wait for it. You drove on, right? You messaged, your story told, and now what's happening is organizations are doing great things in that space.
Yeah.
So yes, they could do more, but let's not wait.
Yeah, no, I have to say I agree.
Yeah, I might come in on that actually, Loretta. So just to say, in the last budget and in the plans for the last while, the government have increased funding for disability training. Now, I know that falls so short of what they could be doing, but there is initiatives that are happening. What I would say where they fall down big time is letting everybody know. They don't go straight to the source, and they work closely with IBEC, and IBEC are phenomenal at trying to get these initiatives to the employers, but the government aren't great at letting people know the funding that is there. They almost do it, in retrospect a lot of the time. We have had this funding for a number of years. So they are trying, but they are not getting the messaging out there. So I would say to everybody to look at that funding if they haven't already done that. Again, what Lorna said and Cathal about, employers need to make sure that they go after all of this stuff for disability, whether the government are doing anything or not. I would say that actually up until about 2 or 3 years ago, disability was the one part of the 9 grounds of discrimination where we were abysmal, like really, really bad. But now we have seen with the likes of CPL, Bank of Ireland, all of the really large employers in the country coming out with their disability initiatives. So everybody, once you see that, you see it as a competitive edge, and disability front and center of the workplace is a competitive edge for people, and they need to see that for sure. So I would say Barry's question is very apt. The government definitely need to do more, but there is initiatives there that we need to look at utilizing.
Brilliant, yeah. And there's a question here then saying, and this is a personal experience, and I'll put this to you in particular, Lorna, but I'm wondering if it's better to mention dyslexia, autism, ADHD during the recruitment stage for the job, or wait until contracts are signed. This particular person went for a job with experience of over 20 years, not using any particular special accommodations in that role over the 20 years. But when they told occupational health, and I think it was for a role in the healthcare sector, about the recent diagnosis of ADHD, I felt that there was a complete, they said, sorry, they wouldn't be able for the role, even though they've been doing the same role for over 20 years, with very good references and so on they had. This is a job in healthcare. I thought my mentioning it would be advocating for it. I will never disclose it again. Thoughts?
Yeah, and that's very disappointing to hear that somebody had gone through a recruitment process and then something emerged and they were treated that way. I think that's appalling, to be honest with you. I think in terms of a recruitment process, I suppose what you need to be very conscious of is, can you fulfill the responsibilities that are attached to that role? And if for whatever reason that you can't, then in the spirit of openness, maybe that is something that you share during an interview process. But there's no blueprint for that. That is my personal view. So you're entering into gainful employment, and you've been upfront and honest. If there is something that will disable you to fulfill your role or discharge your duties that you're signing up to, I suppose, as part of the new role. But I also think, if you do have any personal issues or disabilities that shouldn't in the main disrupt or compromise your ability to do your role and to do it well, then it's a very personal matter. And I don't feel that you should feel obligated to share. That's a really very personal matter. I do think that you can, in a good organization, there'll be resources there that will support people with different disabilities and have different supports available to people. And I think for sure lean into them if they're a support to you and help you in the day-to-day life. But it's a very unique and individual, I suppose, consideration, if that makes sense. I think that's for the individual to make that decision. But if on the face of it you can discharge your duties, then I don't think you're doing anything wrong then by withholding something as something that's personal that really should be on you as an individual if you want to decide and share that.
Great. There's a question down here. I do love the personalisation approach. That would have a real impact. I'm curious about the intersection between DEI and equality legislation. If many more women are taking their employer to court for unfair treatment around menopause support, do you think this will have an impact on how employers view this? Well, I absolutely do. And I know that I'm going to answer this myself. I'm looking at organisations in the UK where women in the UK have taken the number of tribunals have tripled in the last few years because women who are perimenopausal and menopausal have taken cases and won on the grounds of age, gender and disability discrimination. And in fact, the Labour Party have put through a bill which is about equity at work. And one of the things within that will be that organisations over 250 employees would have a published menopause plan. So there's one case in Ireland pending against Rotunda. And so, yes, organisations. So when GDPR came in, overnight, everybody was upskilled in GDPR, training was rolled out, it was mandatory, etc. If the legislation changes in this regard, employers would have the only thing they can do is actually move into training and policy development in this space. So it would have a huge impact, I think. Now it's 13:58, so I have one other question, which is how to keep your DEI networking groups or employee resource groups engaged when they feel the business is towing the line now. I'm talking about DEI externally. Feels like it's not all as genuine now. So on the one hand, how do you keep these groups going versus maybe the public messaging around DEI? Anybody like to take that?
Just maybe a comment, Loretta.
Yeah.
So internal working teams sometimes run out of steam because they're not clear on the purposes of why they're actually coming together and what they're due to work on, or sometimes because they end up drifting into, well, we'll organise the Christmas party for this year. So I think really important to any working group that you have is that, you know, it has to be grounded in the business. We're going to work on this cultural piece because it'll have an impact on people and performance. So that's a way to make sure the leaders come with you and are behind what you're going to do. And then be focused around one particular area. So you know, if there's D&I groups in place, I think it's important to focus in on perhaps one element, work on that solution, present it to the leadership team, then move on to the next one. So be really clear in terms of the purpose and the goal around it. But it has to be grounded in the business. If the internal team isn't grounded in the business, it may run out of steam.
Okay, brilliant. Well, look, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll call it an end to it here now because it's 2:00. I just want to, first of all, thank everyone who attended the webinar, all your questions, your comments and everything like that. I want to thank my panelists, Lorna Conn, CEO of CPL, Cathal Divilly, CEO of Great Place to Work, Ireland, and Laura O'Donovan Calver, Business Development Director at the Irish Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, on behalf of myself as well. We have a recording available for those who missed it. I just want to say thank you, and I imagine we'll be back to this space before the year is out.
Thanks a million, Loretta.
Thanks,
And happy
Loretta.
International Women's
Thanks.
Day. Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks a million, everybody.